Okay, it's 4:30. We'll go ahead and start this meeting of the Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission. Dorothy, will you call roll, please?
Yes, sir. Bob Waller,
Here.
Garrett Harmon,
Here.
Don Barnett,
Here.
Michael Siegerman,
Here.
Rustin Zuber,
Here.
David Jones,
Here.
Marty Leonard.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a quorum. Item number 1, Visitor Citizen Forum. Any person with business not scheduled on the agenda is encouraged to briefly speak to the commission. Please fill out the speaker request form, give it to the commission secretary prior to the meeting. The number of speakers will be limited to the first 10, and each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. No formal action can be taken on these items, as the Open Meetings Act requires formal action items to be posted on an agenda no later than 72 hours before the meeting. If formal action is required, the items will be placed on agenda for a future meeting. Item number 2, the consent agenda. All items listed below on the consent agenda are considered routine or ministerial in nature and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item or items will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Item 2A is the approval of the minutes from the October 5th, 2017 meeting on page 2.
I move that we approve the meeting notes as presented.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Dorothy, just under call to order under those minutes, would you change my name as the call to order, since I wasn't here for that particular meeting?
Yes, sir.
To Commissioner Harmon, please. Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before we go on, we did have one person in the audience, one citizen sign up to speak under here visitors.
Okay, if anybody wants to speak at this point without under visitors, please step forward. Give us your name and your address, please.
Good afternoon, sirs. My name is Nelwyn Sadler, and I live at 604 Tybee Street. I would like to request, I have copies of my existing home and garage, and I would like the commission to grant a leniency on the setback rules. I understand the setback rules are 6 feet at this point. My current garage is a setback of 3 feet. What I am trying to do is get a carport built, and I was told that it would not be able to be built unless it had a 6-foot setback. Can I show you pictures? Would y'all like pictures?
Sure. I don't think this is something we can take action on at this time, but
This would
we're
have to go into a
certainly,
future meeting.
Okay, I didn't know.
there's a certain process you're going to have to go through
Okay,
to make application for this
all right.
exception.
And what would happen if we did a 6-foot setback? It would put the post in the middle of the garage door. And then that would eliminate any size vehicle being able to access this garage. So, and the setback or the property line, the house to the property line is only 16 feet. So if we put it, a normal driveway is 10 to 12 feet wide, it would be up against the house.
Okay. The improvements are already there, so I think you're going to need to go. I'll defer to Sabina, but I think there's a process you'll go through for an exception to what you're asking. But
Okay,
there is an application process.
okay. Thank you, sir.
You
So-
haven't submitted an application to put the
No.
carport up yet?
Sabina, I have had a meeting with Sabina a couple of weeks ago, and she did not think that the application would deem submitting.
Sabina, comments?
We did have a meeting, yes, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago. The process that we're talking about would be a setback variance process. It would not come to this commission. It would go to the zoning board of adjustment. I read through, actually, you have an item on your agenda later this evening for the, and without touching on that subject, but there's a list of criteria, and there are 8 of them. They basically speak to special conditions and hardship. And what we spoke about in our meeting would be the likelihood of being able to rise to that level of meeting the criteria. And after that, certainly the staff assists through the zoning board of adjustment process. And at that point, it becomes the zoning board's charge to make those findings. Very similar to the ones that are on your agenda tonight. It's just a different board.
Okay. Does that give you some guidance as to your next step? You have to get an application to the zoning board of adjustment to start with? Is that what you're saying?
That would be the process. Another option is to talk through, this is a longer process, obviously, but because this is an older area of town, to talk through changing potentially the setbacks for these older areas where you've got existing development, where there's very little room to add on, and structures such as carports would very likely encroach into newer setback areas that were applied after the fact, after construction of these older areas.
And that's
That
much,
obviously is a longer
that's
process.
a much larger consideration.
And that's a
Yes.
zoning, that goes to the zoning changes here.
That would come here eventually,
The
yes.
zoning changes, so she needs a zoning change probably for that to occur.
Well, and the bulk of the properties in our area or right up against the property lines, I mean, back in the 40s, we didn't have a 6-foot setback, you know, and so it's everywhere in the block. They're right back to the property line, or even 3 feet from the property line at best. So I, would like the commission to think about it in the future, possibly giving some type of grandfather law to these older subdivisions.
That's a good point. But I would suggest for you to do what you want to do to expedite that would be to go through the zoning board of adjustment.
Okay, well, she had told me that probably there would not be any way that I could get it through the zoning, because I don't have a hardship. So that's the reason why I came here.
Well,
I mean, the hardship is not being able to put the truck in the garage.
Well, that would be up to them to make that
Okay,
exception,
Yes.
Okay.
should they choose to do that. But the only thing that will come to us is if we did have to make an exception to a larger area for zoning.
okay.
Is the garage, is the 3-foot garage setback to the property line, does that meet code for that
It-
property?
It's grandfathered.
Okay,
Is
so the garage is grandfathered in.
So, but it's the new addition, the
Okay.
carport.
Yeah,
She
the
wants to
carport's
put it-
the issue. And in 79, when we purchased the property, the garage was existing. I don't know when the garage was built. The house was built in the 40s.
Well, I would think, just based on what you said, that's something they would entertain,
That's something that the zoning board could entertain, yes.
right?
It
Okay.
would be up to them,
Okay, that's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
yes.
Thank you, sirs.
Oh, you're welcome, thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.
Sabina.
Okay, number 3A. Number 3 is for public hearing consideration and action. 3A is a public hearing and action. CUP and resolution, public hearing consideration and action of resolution concerning a requested conditional use permit for a new 7,584 square foot O'Reilly Auto Parts store for the purpose of the retail sale of auto parts on an approximately 0.91 acre tract. Legal description being a tract of land situated by the John C. Sheffield Survey, abstract number 281, City of Kerrville, Kerr County, Texas, being all of a tract of land conveyed to Robert L. Harder by special warranty deed recorded in volume 1227, page 229, deed records of Kerr County, Texas, located at 1327 Junction Highway, file number 2017-053. This does require a public hearing, and I will open that public hearing. Well, first of all, Sabine.
Yes, thank you. I just have a few comments other than you have in your staff report, description of the surrounding area and of the uses that are, get to the aerial here. Basically, to the north across Junction Highway, you have retail. You have retail to the west and to the east of the existing of this vacant lot. And you had a larger copy of this site plan, which essentially is not necessarily the site plan itself that's coming before you for review. That was done by the Development Review Committee, and we have checklists to make sure that all of the items that would normally be required on a site plan are met before this came forward to you. But essentially, usually what you see is a site plan because there's a requirement that the applicant prove up that all of the conditions of making sure that the site is compatible with the surrounding area is proven up to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then ultimately the City Council. So essentially, the zoning here on this site and on the area farther to the east, let me back up just for a second here. Specifically, so this vacant lot is sandwiched in between the Starbucks and a pawn and gun store to the east, so it's in the middle there. The area to the west is zoned, where the Starbucks is zoned PD, Planned Development District, and then the property line in between the Starbucks and this lot is where the GR district, the Guadalupe River district, starts. So the GR district has some uses listed by right. It is fairly limited, and I think the intent of the Guadalupe River district is to be limited to uses such as multifamily, life care. These would be uses by right, in other words, would not have to come through this process. Public and institutional, offices and restaurants are permitted by right as well. Limited retail trade would be the difference between what's before you this evening, and the limited retail trade is the square footage essentially, which is 3,000 square feet. So if this use were 3,000 square feet, under 3,000 square feet, then it would not have to come before this commission or the council. As conditional uses then would be this retail trade 1, which the size of the building puts it into this category. And then also business services would also have to come through this process. Personal services, on-site consumption of alcohol or bars, cocktail lounges is technically what the term is in the ordinance, and funeral homes would also have to come through this process. So that gives you an idea of what this zoning district looks like in terms of uses. And that's all I have on.
It's only that above 3,000 square feet is what you're saying. You
And
say conditional use.
there's a fairly long list of retail trade uses that are in the definitions section of the zoning district. Sale of new auto parts is one. If sale of new auto parts were 3,000 square feet or less, it would not have to come through this process. Anything in the retail trade that is less than 3,000 square feet would be permitted by right.
What's the size that they're requesting?
7,
7,000.
A little over
75.
7,500.
7584.
Yes. That's all I had on this one. The applicant is here to answer any additional questions that you might have over and above the zoning district. That's all I have.
Thank you, Sabina. Okay, this requires a public hearing. I'll open that public hearing at 4:45. Anyone wishing to speak before this commission, please approach the podium. I have a request form from Fred Henneke. Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Fred Henneke, 840 Earl Garrett, and I'm here as the representative of Barry and Victoria Fong, who own the property where the Starbucks is located. They have some concerns about the proposed use of the property for an O'Reilly's Auto Parts store. I have given to Ms. Miller, hopefully passed out to the commission, some concerns that have been expressed, which I'll go through briefly. Before I go through my concerns, though, I'd like to just say that this is a very large building on a very small site. It's a small site, it's a narrow site, and it's going to take a lot of.
What's the size of the Starbucks building?
Well, Starbucks building's on quite a larger tract.
What's the size of the building?
I don't know for sure.
This building?
No, the
No,
Starbucks.
Starbucks building is probably about, I'd say, it's not very deep, so I'd say it's about 4,500 to 6,000 square feet. It's more compact. So just as a comment as a citizen, that it's going to be a very large building on a narrow site. One of the things that we've asked for and would like the commission to consider is that the building materials be compatible with the stores in that vicinity. The Gold's Pawn and Gun Shop is half brick, half mason. Starbucks is all mason. The next store, AT&T, is, if not all mason, predominantly mason. The next door, which is the Fuddruckers, is again about half mason. So we would like the construction of this store to be compatible with the style and materials that are used. Also, if you look across the highway to the retail, most of those, if not all of those, are also constructed out of mason materials. So we would ask that the commission consider requiring that the building materials be compatible with what's already in the vicinity. We're concerned about environmental issues. I'm certain that the plan is to remove the mound that's in the front of the building, which is quite high. It's front of the building site. It's a good 12, 15 feet above the street, and it's been used as a fill. Now, of course, it was designed to be used as a clean fill, but unless there's someone out there sifting through what's being dumped, no one really knows what's in there. I don't know to what extent there's been any sort of environmental investigation into what the materials consist of, but I would suggest if that hasn't been done, it's really imperative that it be done.
I think a phase one, though, is always required, isn't it, Sabrina? Phase one environmental?
You know, I'm not sure, and I don't have an engineer here this evening.
Well, that would be done when probably when the property is purchased and financing is requested. If you're buying a property for cash and you're not going to a bank for financing, I don't think there's a requirement for you as the buyer to do an environmental. Now, I don't know if the city requires an environmental study to be done for site plan approval and building permits.
I don't believe so, because I've not seen one come through, nor that we've requested one. We do look at what we call site civils, which is basically to make sure that the drainage after development does not increase from before development. But as far as any environmental surveys, I don't believe that we require.
Well, site plan approval would be
locally.
pretty subject to the drainage because of the fact the property's on the river, correct? They would have to really meet some pretty specific requirements.
Elevation requirement.
We did have that question in, just today from an adjoining property owner to the east, I believe, as far as drainage questions are concerned, and I did get a chance to briefly talk with Kyle, our city engineer, to ask about drainage, and because this site is immediately adjacent to a drainage system, they would not be required to detain.
Would,
There's a detention pond nearby, you're saying? Or retention?
Because they're right on the river, they would not be required to have a detention pond,
really?
according to Kyle.
Mr. Heineke, would your client be satisfied if your concerns were met, drainage, environmental, and you know, the construction exterior? If all those things were met, would your client be okay with the size of the building?
It would go a long way, sir, certainly. You know, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you have a mound out there that's been filled, that's basically on the river. And I find it extraordinary that there's no investigation that I've heard of that's been done to determine what's in that mound. You know, if O'Reilly's is a very large chain, we all know that. They may not be financing it independently through a financial institution.
Correct.
They may have a letter of credit or some other mechanism whereby they construct the property. So I would urge the commission to consider.
The site plan shows that the site is gonna be essentially flat.
Correct, which means they're gonna remove
They're
that
gonna remove
mound.
that, that pile.
But what's in the mound that may have created issues,
I understand.
Well, whether they're gonna finance it or not, when they go to remove the dirt that's on the site and they have to dispose of it, it'll have to be done. I'm assuming if they're gonna remove that dirt and they wanna put it somewhere, no one's gonna take that dirt unless it is
Clean.
tested. And if it has something in it that can't be dumped it'll have to be dumped in an area that's.
Well, I think Mr. Henneke's concern is, while that pile of stuff has been there, has anything bled out of there
Leached down.
into the ground?
Sure, if it leaches
That
in.
could go to the river. Mike, do you know if that is a requirement? Usually an environmental study is required if a prior business was there that had contaminated stuff like gasoline, whatever.
I would suspect that if someone purchased that property, they would have done some type of environment. We may not know about it, but if I
And
was
the
buying a piece
applicant
of
is
property, I
here.
would. Oh, that'd be great. That's what I would.
I figured they would.
Okay.
does the city have a copy of that Phase 1 report? Okay. Another environmental concern is hazardous waste. Auto parts stores create hazardous waste such as old batteries, used motor oil, et cetera. We're concerned about procedure for proper disposition of those.
Is this new auto parts or used auto parts? New.
The request is for new auto parts.
So I'm assuming they wouldn't be.
Well, but sometimes they take in-trade batteries. What do they do with the disposition of those? Are they contained inside or are they contained outside?
They do that, but it's all for state and federal regulations.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, there's plenty of regulations that cover
Extensively
that.
regulated, yeah.
Mhm.
I'm sure they're regulated, but our concern is, you know, how are they handled within the site? I mean, they're segregated, they're in a place where they're not going to be rained on, where there's not going to be.
Yeah, there have been, all the utility roads inside, they have specific containers for that, and, get more information if you want.
Pretty sure that's pretty specifically federally and state regulated as well.
Well, you know, but O'Reilly's is a known chain, they've been in business a long time, but there were some concerns raised in California in 2016 over the disposal practices of waste materials, which resulted in O'Reilly's paying a $9.98 million fine. So, you know, just it's a kind of a generic concern, but
Sure.
the concern is
Understood.
elevated by virtue of what past situation. So we raise that as a concern. And again, I think it's addressed in the zoning ordinance about prevent any runoff from the O'Reilly site from negatively impacting the quality of river. You know, one of their parking lots is in the back of the store. What mechanisms are in place to prevent used motor, the stuff that you typically find in this parking lot from finding its way to the river.
So, Sabina, what we're looking at tonight is just to approve the use because of the size of the building. If the building was 3,000 square feet, O'Reilly could put a building in there and do anything, operate. They could use batteries, use oil, whatever they want. I mean, I know that's regulated, but if it's, so we're really just looking at approving because the building is larger than what zoning allows.
Essentially, that's what it's boiling down to,
Okay.
yes.
And I'm not sure if there are any exterior material requirements on something like that.
Not right now. Mm-mm.
And I'm not sure, I couldn't find on these plans what the exterior is.
I couldn't either.
It'll look like the store over here on Sidney Baker Lane.
I'm not sure what we meant by there. I think it's just,
These elevations are masonry.
It looks like the Sidney Baker Lane.
Mm-hmm. Split face.
It does look like, Mr. Enacted, that the exterior is gonna be masonry.
Good.
And it's we'll share these, but it's a painted split face concrete block, so it has a stone texture appearance to it. The colors, to me, are earth tones, like you would see with limestone. Share those down there. There's several copies.
They have an existing store on
Sidney
Sidney
Baker.
Baker that's got that same
Yeah, same look.
configuration. Or certainly not to it.
Obviously,
Yeah, well,
at least partially the
so
flood,
then
the
you want-
site's in the floodplain, so it has to be elevated.
Well, that
Out
would
of-
be when they go, you have a comment, Mike?
Well, I assume that's why the dirt's there. You know, they're
Mhm.
gonna spread that dirt out and compact it and do whatever they need to do in compliance with the floodplain
Right.
regulations. The other thing to remember too, this is why it's come to y'all as a CUP, and be mindful of what a CUP is, conditional use permit. So you all are looking at this use because it's greater than 3,000 square feet, so you have an opportunity to add conditions. Now, I'm always mindful with my advice to P&Z and then council ultimately, let's be, reasonable and kind of do what we've done in the past. I'm not aware of what we've done in the past, but for instance, I know these type of places, and it sounds like y'all are going that way. Maybe we want to limit, oil changes in the parking lot. You could add that, no oil changes in the parking lot. Some people roll up to these type of businesses and do oil changes in the parking lot, so you could limit that. But whatever you all want to see within reason, within a conditional use permit, now, this is the bite at the apple.
That's the time to do that.
Mhm.
Do you know it? Do you represent them?
yeah, I'm with Anderson, the civil consultant for O'Reilly.
Okay, I guess my question would be, are they going to accept, old oil? Some places do.
We typically do, but again, it's all for, not super familiar with the process.
Okay.
But it's all from the building, and they have safeguards to keep it from leaving the building, so.
It probably be the same requirements as the oil change place has on Junction Highway, I would think, as
Mhm.
far as protection of stuff running into the river.
I don't think they do oil changes.
I don't think they do either.
What happens is a guy will break down and he'll
Oh,
need to
yeah.
change a part out. and he'll change the part in the parking lot.
Right.
That's what happens. So if there's any oil spillage or anything like that, it's gonna happen because
They're
he's
not gonna be
changing the
doing
part.
anything behind the building for
No.
sure. And
No,
as far as
but
the
what
batteries go, someone comes in and buys a battery and makes a trade for the old battery, that's gonna be probably put in
Inside,
a rack
you
or
said.
something inside the warehouse until whoever O'Reilly uses to take the batteries to be recycled or whatever is gonna pick them up. There's not gonna be any filling of battery acids and things like that, I would
No.
assume. But, I mean, I understand the concerns, but like Mike said, I think
Well,
prove the use with conditions.
you know, if they, it probably would, if they don't do oil changes on site, putting a prohibition against oil changes on site wouldn't hurt anything. What it
No.
would stop
Exactly right.
is somebody pulling up there after hours and changing their oil on the site. You know, but that would be something that would be useful. Drainage, obviously, we're concerned that the natural flow of the water is not diverted onto the Starbucks site. I think that's addressed in the requirements.
Right.
Just raise that as an issue. We would request that the dumpster be relocated to the east side of the property as opposed to the west side, where the people going to Starbucks come around and go to the drive-in. And we'd also request that obviously the dumpster site be properly screened and secured. You know, those of you who take advantage of Starbucks have seen that the Starbucks dumpster site is concrete, is masonry. So we would ask that there be a requirement that the dumpster location be moved to the west side of the back parking lot as opposed to to the east side as opposed to the west side, and that it be properly screened and secured.
The
We
problem
would,
with the dumpster is you have to have access with the truck to get in there to pick it up is usually the problem.
I understand it might be necessary for them to flip-flop
Something.
the access from the west side to the east side, you know, just move that over and move the building this way, you know. Exterior lighting, we'd ask that the exterior lighting be screened to avoid light pollution. Light pollution is becoming an increasing issue everywhere, so we would ask that the exterior lighting be screened to avoid light pollution. We'd ask that there be appropriate landscaping between the sites. On the landscape plan, there's an undefined area to the rear of the proposed dumpster site, which there's no explanation to it. We'd like to know what that is.
Would you be able to go to the podium and address some of these concerns, please? If you'd state your name and your affiliation.
Sorry. Molly Robb with Anderson Engineering, civil consultants for O'Reilly. Okay, so what part of the landscaping were you talking about?
Well, we'd like some landscaping between this site and the
Okay, and
Starbucks site.
I believe they're meeting all the requirements for the site with their landscaping, and the only issue with that is that's gonna be a significant retaining wall. To get the site up to elevation for the floodplain, most of the site is gonna be surrounded by a retaining wall, so they probably couldn't fit landscaping in, and I don't know if there's a buffer required there. Would be the only reason they don't have any shown.
Well, it's a request that you landscape
Okay.
between the two sites.
The only issue with that to create enough room would be to narrow that drive aisle, which I don't have site plan unfortunately, but that might be pretty close to what it has to be already. But I can double check on that. As far as drainage goes, it's all directed to the back for existing conditions through a level spreader, so it'll return it to sheet flow before it leaves our system. No water should be directed to either property on the side of us.
Can you address the dumpster location issue?
The truck would be the only thing restricted to
Okay.
moving it over, just to make sure a truck can get in and out. And the site is very tight, so getting a truck in and around the building might be difficult. And that would probably require us to flip the whole site, which I'm not sure O'Reilly would prefer.
Is there, his one thought would be to flip the building,
Yeah,
If you flip the building though, what ends up happening is your access to 27 changes.
Yeah.
And is this access that you've been granted what TxDOT has given you, or will they allow you to flip it? Do you know?
I don't know. I know they have seen this layout and they've approved it, or are okay with it at least, accepted the location. I'm not sure if they wanted us to try to match across the street, because there is a turn lane there. I'm not sure if they were gonna allow us to move it over. But we could double check on that, the DOT if we need to.
And as far as the dumpster, if it stays where you've got it located, are y'all gonna screen that?
Yes.
Appropriately?
It looks like it is.
The show screening.
Yeah, it looks like it's probably gonna be block. It doesn't look like it's fencing, but they're always screened for city requirements.
Okay.
And secured for city requirements, so.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Henneke, do you have any other questions while she's available?
Well, the other concern that we raised was the plans make reference to a couple of sheets that we were not provided. So I'm just wondering, what those sheets are. I think it's a C2.2 and C2.3, which were not included in the site drawings that I received from Ms. Miller. So I'm just just curious as to what would be in those pages that are referenced.
The development site plan that was turned in was contained on several different pages. The only, because it, really what comes under your review is the illustration and not necessarily all of the specifics that are included in the development site plan application. Certainly we can supply that, but it's not your, what's coming before you is making sure that you have adequate information to make sure that it meets the compatibility standard for the area. And that's why just this portion got forwarded to you. We can certainly supply all that to you, but if you believe that that is additional information that you would need in order to make your finding.
So if we choose to do what staff recommends and approve this conditional use permit, then they will move forward and come to the city with development plans, site plans, and things they want to do, and that still has to be approved by the city, correct?
Yes, they have submitted a development site plan, and we did a review of that to make sure that there was adequate information to bring forward to you to make sure that to meet the city's regulations, there would not have to be significant change where we'd have to come back to you at a later date. And we did perform that review. Any on-site, any site, what I call site civil, to make sure that drainage is in compliance and all that still remains to be done. But they're in the middle of the process.
Is this the only platform for Mr. Heineke's clients to have their concerns addressed, or is there still, if we were to approve this, do they still have the option to look at limiting certain things within development?
Well, the next step after this, after you make your recommendation, is to go on to the city council. Now you have some options tonight. If you would like to see some of these concerns addressed and have that come back to you, then you can table the item and make that motion, or recommend approval to the city council and with conditions, and then we would go on to the city council and also have a public hearing at the city council. That would happen anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Any comments from you on that? On a delay, what's a
Obviously, prefer to move forward. If we could, I mean, if there are any conditions, I mean, Riley would be open to them at least. Speaking personally, it would be more convenient just to have the 2 meetings instead of coming back, but I'm happy to travel again if we need to. So, obviously,
Okay.
Well, let's do this. Mr. Henneke, do you have any other items, anything you'd like to bring up?
The only thing I would say, commission members is that it's kind of difficult for me as someone representing the Fongs to comment fully on the proposed CUP without having access to all of the drawings.
We can certainly, I mean, that is public information that is available in our office. It's more of a question of the timing and your preference as far as it coming back to you and giving the, surrounding property owners a chance to come in and see those plans, or to allow that to happen between this meeting and the city council. It's up to you.
Well, with all due respect, when I inquired as to whether the drawings that I was sent were everything, and I was told that yes, that was everything that was been presented. And now I discover that the missing sheets are also available.
Oh, do you have the basic site drawings right
Yes.
now, like we're looking at?
Yes, well, I have basically 5 pages, I think it is, 5 or 6 pages, which I had enlarged at my expense. My old eyes don't look that little, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages.
I don't know.
And now I find that there are other pages. The pages that are missing are actually in existence.
3 or 4.
I don't think it's 3.
Yeah,
Right,
there was 3.
I'd have to see and compare what was given here and with what we have.
Okay, but
I'm
what
not
you
sure.
have should be, you're saying it's not a complete site plan. What you've got.
I'm saying it's not a complete picture of what's going to be done on the site. I don't know what's in the pages I don't have.
The 2.2 and 2.3 are the site details. They would probably have the trash enclosure, paving details, sidewalk, striping, so trash enclosure would probably be helpful. If you take a look at it, to know what it's gonna look like. But most of it is just technical details for what's gonna be installed inside.
Just more detail, it's just more detail.
Yeah, it's just, the C 2.1 is the overall site plan.
Right.
It references several details or specific concrete sections and stuff like that. And those are on the C 2.2.
Any comments, Gary? What you think needs to be seen?
No, I feel that, for this commission's responsibility, we have the information that we need regarding the size of the building, the use of the building. Some of these other concerns, I think, are addressed with some of the building codes that are already in place.
State and federal regulations for
Right.
environmental.
Now, as far as screening around the trash dumpster goes, there are requirements about that, but there are also options. If, that could be a condition that we impose, is that it must be a masonry enclosure instead of a wood enclosure. That could be a condition that we feel like is needed. The location of it, I agree. I think that the waste management trucks that are going to be going in there, they need as few turns as possible, especially in reverse. And so that's why this is set up as a straight in, straight out. And if we were to flip everything else, that just means that we're putting all of those needs on the other neighbor.
Right.
And so I don't know that it's fair one way or the other to take it off of one neighbor and put it onto the other neighbor. I think the location is fine. I think if we were to take the screening and have it be a block that matches the building,
Same
that,
colors.
yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't want to hold up the process for additional drawings that aren't really going to provide us any more information than what we already have.
Mr. Henneke, I think what Sabina was saying is that you can go and review those specifics that were not included in your package and and get back, even before the city council meeting, or to bring those up at the council meeting, if you have any particular desires outside of what we might include tonight when we look at it.
All right. What I'm hearing and what I would like to see is the condition on the screening of the dumpster site, a condition on the no oil changes permitted on the site. I didn't hear anything about the screening of the exterior light. I'd like to have that addressed as well. I'd like to see those things made as conditions, because this is, after all, a conditional use
Right.
permit, such as we got with
I'm not sure,
Starbucks.
but I think the lighting is required to be, what, down facing? I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
I don't think Kerrville has a lighting requirement as far as the city of Kerrville goes.
Other than if there were an adjoining residential area, that it
Right.
wouldn't shine into the residential
Correct.
area.
Correct.
Mr. Henneke, you didn't mention a screening fence along that retaining wall. Would that be something that would be helpful?
That would be very helpful. Thank you. That's an excellent
Okay,
suggestion.
because I mean, that could be put on top of the retaining wall as opposed to
Trying to do
landscaping.
landscape.
If not a fence, there's already gonna be railing, one of the two, because it is tall enough that it would be repaired. So I can double check on and see what they called out for that. But I can double check and make sure there's some sort of screen on top for that.
And the other thing is to go back to my first point, I'd like to have the permit conditioned upon presentation of a clean, level 1, at least, environmental review of the mound. They probably have already done it. They've already done it. All I have to do is turn it in. If not, I'm
Did you
concerned.
say you already had that?
Yeah.
Phase one?
Yeah, they already have it.
I'd like to have those as part of the condition so the staff can review it.
Well, who are you looking to review the phase 1 environmental?
I would do
Just
staff,
for
with
this.
the city staff.
Just to have it? that it's
You
been-
have it, look at the conclusions, take a glance at it, and if your hair
Subject
doesn't
to, subject
go
to
on
the city's
fire.
approval of the phase 1 environmental, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think my thought on the retaining wall, putting some kind of fencing above that, you don't want to do anything, just like if Starbucks was looking to put something in here that impedes the view, maybe from the highway to that. Is there, I mean, would you want it to run all the way to the front of the property? Or are you talking about something?
Well, for instance, in the drawings, it shows a loading dock on the Starbucks side. It would be nice to have something that's screened at
Sure.
least
Okay,
past that loading dock.
Sure.
okay. That makes sense. Okay. Anything else?
No, sir. Thank you all.
Okay. No, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, anyone else to make comments during this public hearing section? Hearing none, I close public hearing at 5:18. Okay, commissioners, you've heard the public hearing comments.
I mean, I think if we can satisfy Mr. Heineke's client's concerns and add it into the requirements for the conditional use permit, that we can satisfy O'Reilly's and satisfy the neighbor as well. I think that's, and I think if, like Mike said, it is a conditional use permit, this is our shot to, maybe we need to have a motion that approve this conditional use permit subject to,
include all those.
I think Garrett might be able to word it better than anybody else.
Well, I guess, we would need to list the conditions. So one is
Environmental report.
environmental report being submitted.
To the city for approval.
No oil changes on site.
No oil changes on site.
Mason,
Dumpster enclosure to be masonry to match the building.
in,
Screening to cover the,
and the same color problem.
Mhm.
screening to cover the view from Starbucks side for the loading dock in the rear.
Screening probably be placed on top of the retaining wall to cover specifically the loading area.
I mean, if we're gonna describe that screening, I think if there's not a screening requirement from the city that is there.
There's not a requirement unless you apply that condition, and then there are some guidelines in the zoning. If this had been residential adjacent to it, we can apply that.
I mean, so I guess it seems like in the screening that the city uses for those situations, there's a 6-foot option, there's an 8-foot option, there's a masonry, there's a wood. And so if we're going to list a screening condition, I think we should probably say what that condition is. Do we need to give it a height? Do we need to give it a material?
Need to be more specific.
Rustin, do you remember those screening types?
Yeah, it was a 6 and 8, but the problem is how tall is the retaining wall?
Yeah, I think
There's some
it
questions.
needs to be tall enough to, cover the view from the Starbucks side of the loading in the rear of the building. I mean, I don't know how you word that, but it might only have to be 3 feet, depending like how tall is the retaining
Just
wall?
tall enough
to hide the view
to
of
restrict the view from
restrict the view from
Starbucks.
Starbucks.
If we're talking about a 2-foot retaining wall, which I don't know what we're talking
Right.
about, I think 6 foot would be adequate.
Correct. Maybe you could say
So
6
8
foot
foot-
total, but
8 foot
include
gross.
the screening and the retaining wall, a minimum of 6 feet? Would that be sufficient, you think?
About 10 feet.
Is around 8 feet tall.
Yeah, if you look at the elevations,
Just, one way I would say it is that the screening needs to be 2 feet higher than the dock. That's one way you could possibly put it that way.
The retaining wall may already be that, because the dock is probably gonna be 4 feet.
8 foot, of course.
No, that's the
Oh,
wall.
the retaining wall.
The retaining wall is 8 feet in the air, and the loading
Typically, a loading dock is 4 feet.
to the,
I thought you said the loading dock was 8 feet.
No, that's the retaining wall.
Retaining wall is 8 feet.
yeah.
So that perhaps would be adequate.
If it's
Just to
because the
screen.
retaining wall between the sites and the loading dock is 4 feet.
Yeah, you're-
So at a height,
May not see.
at a height that restricts the view of the loading dock from the adjacent property.
Correct, yes.
Starbucks, though, I believe is lower, on the lower side, isn't it? Is it lower, the property is lower than this property?
Well, this property is going to be probably
Yeah, it's gonna be raised.
raised at
It's gonna be
least to where
raised.
Starbucks
Yeah.
is.
You have to take it in effect that they're going to raise it up.
Right.
Yeah.
With the bill. And then
Right.
that will affect this height.
The whole thing will be higher than Starbucks property, which gives you line of sight, it's gonna be greater than 8 feet. So the 8 feet will be plenty.
Should be.
So, no screening wall.
Okay, just want to make sure that there's a retaining wall and tor fence above that retaining wall to screen the loading dock from the adjacent property.
looking at the elevations, the retaining wall at roughly the location where it lines up with the front of the building, it's at about 5 feet high there.
What
And
about the
then
back?
increases in height as it goes all the way to the back to about 10 feet by the dumpster.
That's pretty high.
So, if you're on the Starbucks site to try and see that loading dock, you'd have to be almost on the,
8 foot tall.
yeah, or on the other side of the site. I mean, that
Right.
line of sight to reach 8 feet
It's,
is pretty
you
far
gotta be
away.
pretty high.
And I don't know that we need to make a tall wall even taller.
Right. I don't think so.
Unnecessarily. I
I
mean,
don't-
there's some safety issues with an 8-foot and a 10-foot wall that need to be met, but
I think the elevations show they are calling out a railing.
a railing,
Yeah.
okay.
Probably have to. That high wall.
So, I mean, in my mind, the wall itself serves as a screening
Tool.
tool to that loading
agree
dock
with you.
in particular.
I agree with you. I don't think we need to require it. It's already in the plans.
So for our conditions, we have environmental
Phase 1.
phase 1 study to be submitted to the city. No oil changes allowed on site. Dumpster enclosure to be a masonry enclosure to match the material on the building. And we're
Should it be more than just oil? Like, if you change a radiator, you've got hazardous fluids there too. I don't know if that could be more broad. Maybe
I'm
any
pretty sure they don't deal with radiators.
They don't do radiators.
Do auto parts.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting.
Yeah, they send most of their stuff out.
Yeah, most of their main business is supplying other repair shops in the area.
Just has
No, but I'm just
from a
saying,
wholesale
They
perspective.
what
sell
happens though is
radiators.
a guy has trouble and needs the battery, he changes it right there in the parking lot.
According to Riley, that doesn't fit.
It happens, trust me, it happens.
Yeah,
I've done it.
but that's a pretty clean
It's straight
operation.
out, it's real easy.
Okay, if we satisfied the screening requirements,
I think so.
I believe
just based
so.
on the elevation
Yeah.
you see.
I believe so.
Mr. Henneke, does that sound?
The height sounds okay. I'm a bit confused because I heard railing and I heard wall. Is it a
Well,
wall? I mean,
It's a
impervious
retaining wall.
Or is it a railing?
No,
There's a retaining wall with a safety railing installed on top of it so that trucks don't drive off the side and so that people don't fall off the side.
Okay. Okay, any more discussion? I'll accept the motion.
I move that we approve the conditional use permit with the following conditions. Number 1, an environmental phase 1 study on the existing site be submitted to the city for their approval. That no oil changes or other vehicle service be provided on site. And thirdly, the dumpster enclosure to be a masonry material that matches the exterior of the building.
I guess my only concern would be no oil changes or other stuff. They do certain things. I mean, they put windshield wipers in for me, stuff like that. But what I'm thinking, and maybe no oil changes or other
Environmentally sensitive.
fluid, because that's really what our concern is. And I'm not sure how to word that.
Well, I think Mike said environmentally sensitive activities that can contaminate the environment. Windshield wipers doesn't fall in that
No,
category.
I think that
That's
would
good
cover
language.
it.
That's good language.
Environmentally sensitive and maintenance activities.
Okay, so the second condition would read, no oil changes or other
Activities of like kind.
Environmentally sensitive.
environmentally sensitive service to be done on site.
Okay.
Mike, are we within our purview of putting these conditions in this way, this wording?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, any other?
I'll second his motion.
Okay, motion was made.
Clarification,
Yes, sir.
Ms. Robb submitted what the building was gonna look like. Is that considered part of the plan, or, I mean?
Being the elevation?
No, the materials, the
That's-
site, the
that's-
color.
Yeah.
That's not gonna have anything to do with what we're doing, I don't think.
But It is available if you want.
Well, I looked at it, what I'm saying is it doesn't become part of
The conditional use permit?
C.
I don't know that we can,
We can, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
We can attach the, the elevation plan to the CUP,
okay.
and you can approve that if you'd like to do that. I mean, what I anticipate doing, I'm practicing planning, but, you know, we usually attach those, if you all want us to do that, the site plan, so that, you know, they're constrained by that plan. I got up here for one reason. I want to be clear. I have no problem. I think you all can approve or add a condition about the environmental report. I don't think it ought to be subject to our approval as a city, because I don't think we have anyone on staff that can look at that and go, that's a great report, nor do I think we want to pay someone for that. I think that's something between the property owner and, you know, buyer and seller, and I assume it's clean. It's probably going to say that, and so but I don't want there to be any expectation that we're going to somehow
Take
double
responsibility
stamp.
for that.
Right.
Correct.
Mr. Henneke, I think your concern was that you'd just like to see that one has been done. Phase one.
I wanna, you know, because I believe from what the commissioners have said, that if it was bad, it would have been a purchase, okay, so let's just have it,
But apparently,
Just submitted to the city to have.
yeah, as part of the.
just as part of the package, but that's not under our purview to,
I understand.
or the city.
Yeah, I understand what Mr. Hayes is saying, but
Okay.
again, I think the citizen and representative, we would feel better if we knew that there had been a study done and it was in the city's hands.
Okay.
So it could be submitted
Just
for
to,
on file?
just to be submitted.
When we get it, and I assume the applicant will do that, we'll make sure that we alert Mr. Henneke and we can get him a copy.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks for being here, Mike.
Take the word out approval.
Yeah, okay. Take two. I move that we approve the conditional use with the following conditions. Number one, environmental phase one study on site be submitted and kept on file with the city. That number two condition, no oil changes or other environmentally hazardous services be performed on site. And number three, that the dumpster enclosure to be a masonry enclosure that matches the masonry on the building.
Okay.
Do we want to add the elevations that were presented today be included as a condition?
Is that okay with O'Reilly if we attach this?
It's gonna
Okay.
look like that. That's their look. That's their look.
Okay.
All right, so the fourth condition would be that the exterior elevations provided by the owner be attached to the conditional use.
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
Screening? Are you gonna do the screening?
Oh,
This is a retaining
you got
wall.
this.
That you're gonna accept, okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. Thank you for your comments, and Mr. Henneke, thank you for
Thank you all for your time.
bringing this up. Okay, 3B is public hearing in action and a variance request. Public hearing consideration in action concerning a request for a variance to allow reinstallation of 14 Peterson Health Campus flagpole banners in accordance with Article 2, signs, Section 6-37, attached prohibited signs of the Code of Ordinance, City of Kerrville, Texas, located at 551 Hill Country Drive South, file number 2017-0, 66. This also requires a public hearing, but Sabina, you have comments?
Yes, thank you. This case has actually been in the works for a number of months, so it predates my arrival here. It's my understanding that we did receive a complaint. Actually, it was a set of several sites that this complainant wanted the city code enforcement staff to go out and look at, and this was one of them that had several banners, and I'll show you a few photos in a minute here that were submitted by the applicant. We did go into code enforcement where we wrote a letter to to Peterson here in this case to request removal of the banners, and they were removed. So this evening, this case comes before you as a sign variance to allow the reinstallation of the banners that had been put up. This is a copy of the sign plan that actually shows all of the different light posts with the ones indicated that where the banners were to be installed and then were installed and then have been removed, versus the light posts that did not have the banners on them. So there were several of them that were put up. They are, most of them, largely motivational in nature. They do contain the Peterson logo and the Peterson, the word Peterson, so essentially commercial signs as well. The standard of review, and this is another photo of one of the banners before it was removed. The standard of review that I was talking about earlier is almost exactly the same language that the Zoning Board of Adjustment sees when it considers variances. Basically, that there are exceptional circumstances, or what I call special conditions, of the property itself. So something that is physical on the property that results in unnecessary hardship in meeting the strict letter of the ordinance. And that the variance would not be contrary to the public interest, not be contrary to the comprehensive plan. It is that it is the minimum necessary to grant relief for that hardship, and that it's related to the property itself. Another standard here is that the variance will not effectively repeal any development regulations that currently apply to the property, and that's one of the reasons that I had that recommendation is to go ahead and hold the public hearing and then to discuss whether or not we should begin procedures to specify that this type of sign would indeed be covered under, be covered under, and I laid at your place the actual sign regulations in their entirety. But what I did at on top was to lay the actual regulation that's in play here, which is the banners restriction that restricts banners. It allows one banner per site, but only if that banner is attached to a wall or to a building face. So these banners clearly don't fall under that exemption for the one banner. So on the back side of that excerpt, I put the definition of a community sign that is something that I looked at the end of last week when I was preparing the staff report to look to see if I could make an interpretation to have these signs fall within the community sign definition, and therefore there is a provision that community signs are also exempt from meeting the sign regulations. I had real difficulty in fitting these signs into that category. That doesn't mean that can't happen, that we might be able to rewrite that definition somewhat to include these, but that would be definitely up to the commission as far as whether or not that would be an option that you wanted to pursue. Certainly under the 8 criteria that would be a requirement for a sign variance that would still be under your purview to examine as well.
The language on those signs, though, was more motivational or community-oriented, that you should take good care of yourself. They're not really,
They're not advertising.
they're not doing anything else. They're more in the community's interest. Is that fair to say?
That is very fair to say, yes.
What was
Yep.
the complaint about removing the signs, that they were why?
My understanding is it came in under, there's actually 13 separate complaints by this one individual, just,
You had that many
To-
surgeries that didn't go well?
well, it actually had to do with different sites, and for us to go out and look at other sites that may have
Oh.
sign violations, and this one clearly, because it didn't fit it within the exemption of the one banner that would be attached to a building, so they were considered banners that would have to be removed. The one provision that I saw under the exempt sign, in this exempt sign provisions, I thought was not very clear that these types of signs would fit within that classification, and so that's why I excerpted that one out to show you, as far as perhaps coming forward later with an amendment to make it very clear that these types of signs would be included in the community sign.
So we're going to have to
Category.
rewrite the code, or what are we going to have to do here?
Well, we can look at some different options. Let's have a public hearing
Okay.
first if we could.
Thank you, Sabine.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, this requires a public hearing. I'll call the public hearing to order at 5:42. Anybody wishing to speak on behalf of the applicant, please go to the podium, state your name and your address, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you for the work you do after observing and listening to the prior discussion. I hope this is not quite as complex. Sabina did a great job of kind of providing an overview. As you may be aware, I believe in 2015 we undertook an effort to rebrand and communicate a different perspective of our role as an institution. Historically, and I can't help but when I'm standing where I'm standing, think about what was Sid Peterson Memorial Hospital.
Your office was right up there, wasn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it was. The role of hospitals has changed significantly in terms of reacting to folks who come to us and now having a responsibility and obligation of communicating and encouraging healthy behaviors, because as a healthcare service provider, we are at now some financial risk for people's self-destructive behaviors, and so we seek to encourage healthy behaviors. And for that reason, we pursued the Peterson Health brand, and as part of our efforts to communicate that, we have over 900 employees. We have well over 100 volunteers. We have well over 100 physicians, all of whom come and go, not just in the medical center building, but also the Callow Professional Building, which is adjacent, and the Ambulatory Care Center building, which is also on what is roughly a 35-acre campus. It is not a commercial enterprise. We're not selling tacos. We're not selling auto parts. We're not promoting somebody coming to a play or a concert tonight. We're there to take care of folks' health care needs. It is my understanding, and I will confess, we worked with a group that helped us with this branding plan and a communication plan that resulted in the placement of these 14 banners. They have done similar work across the United States in I don't know that I can say hundreds of cities, but I would say at least 100 cities, and have never run into this kind of issue. That being said, it's our failing for not getting into the depths of the sign ordinance. I do spend some part of my day looking at regulatory items, and I will say the Kerrville sign ordinance rivals some of the regulations that the United States government
Medicare
publishes.
can come up with.
Yes, yes. That said, we want to comply with what regulations exist. As has been reported, this came to we put up the banners in January of 2016. 10 months later, we were advised by the city that we were in violation of the ordinance, and that complaint or that notification came as a result of a complaint. It's my understanding, I don't know who this individual was, and I really don't care, that this individual was cited for a sign ordinance, and that individual took it upon themselves to drive around Kerrville making notes of anybody who also might, you know, I appreciate that people want to do that sort of thing. My position is this. I think as a healthcare institution, we have a unique role in this community. We discussed early this year, after the notification and removal of the banners, we contacted the city. At the time of that conversation, I believe Don Davis was serving in an interim capacity. Don talked with us, and we kind of went back and forth. Subsequently, later in the spring, I don't have the date, but we did meet with city representatives, talked about the scenario at play, asked for advice on, is it better to request a variance, or is it better to request an amendment to the sign ordinance? I'll try not to go way back in history, but there have been other situations when we built the new medical center where I wish now that I had actually requested an amendment to some city requirements, because I think hospitals do have a unique role in our community, and may not appropriately be subject to the restrictions that are placed on other commercial businesses. That aside, the request was, should we request an amendment? Should we request a variance? The suggestion, the recommendation, was that we suggest that we request a variance, and so we did. So I was a little surprised when I saw the report come back, and I know there have been changes in staff, and institutional history is sometimes short-lived. If when I looked at the report and then saw that, well, it doesn't appear to be arguments that align with the findings, and we seem to be making an argument for amending, and a recommendation for the legislative amendment in lieu of the variance, I don't know what to say other than my thought is that if I request an amendment and say, oh, hospitals should be exempt from the sign ordinance or something to that effect, if I'm putting myself in your shoes, I'm thinking, ooh, that opens a pretty wide door, whereas a variance might be a little narrower approach. So I'm here first and foremost to ask for your approval. Certainly am willing and open to think about different alternatives. We think there's value in providing inspirational, encouraging messages, certainly to our employees who work very, very hard, 24/7, 365. While we're asleep, they're taking care of patients who need help, and it can be a very stressful environment. So we seek to encourage and nurture those staff members, and certainly the visitors and physicians and volunteers and others who come to our doors. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm certainly willing to answer questions or take criticism or suggestions.
So being that the variance that's being requested has nothing to do with what's on the banners, correct? It's just for the banners themselves being installed at that location? We're not talking about what's on those banners as far as the language.
Actually, the reason that I put the community sign language in front of you and pulled that out separately from, to highlight it, is for the purposes of, because I was looking at exempt sign, the list of the exempt signs, and this was the closest category that these signs could fit into.
I think it fits pretty good.
So the
Community
message,
service, I think it fits very well.
the message on the signs is the basis for the variance because of it. It's considered a
it's-
community
Need a variance.
message. Is that what we're,
Community service.
community service?
That is certainly, I think, well, I look at Mike too, Mr. Hayes, but I would consider that to be under your discretion to make that interpretation.
So if they just said Peterson Healthcare Center,
Yeah, I don't think what's on the banners presently is a real concern. And I'm not sure that it was a concern to the lady that lodged the complaint.
okay.
I think the lodging of the complaint was based on the fact that
She was
it was
mad.
more than one.
Correct, correct.
It was more, it was one banner not on the building.
Right.
It was not a banner on the
It
building.
had nothing to do with
The
the
violation
banners
is
or
that
the
it
signs.
is
It had
more
something to
than
do
one
with
banner
she was
and it's
slighted.
We've seen the banners on the building.
Yeah.
People have them everywhere.
But we
But
can, we
there's
as a
more.
board could determine that they fit in this definition and that,
Yeah,
that would
that's
satisfy it.
open for our discussion.
Yeah.
Can we
And
do that, Mike?
interpretation. We have, that's within our purview.
Let me just say,
Here comes
Mike, we're
Mike.
very happy you're here to help us.
Well, let me say that Peterson, thankfully, I haven't used Peterson a great deal, but they are cutting edge. I think they're trying to do stuff and we all need encouraging messages from time to time, certainly employees. In my opinion, I don't think and it's come across my desk many months ago, and I just said I didn't think it matched completely up with community service signs. And so at the time, and I think part of this was lost in translation when we had staff changes and all that, I said, why don't we, it seems like a good deal over there, and it seems like they're doing stuff that, while outside of perhaps our sign code, is something that we ought to, allow, or certainly go to Planning and Zoning Commission and say, this is not a bad idea. When you adopt a sign code like we did, and for y'all's reminder, we had the chamber involved in it, and we went over it for probably close to a year, and everyone signed off on it. It was the greatest thing we've ever done in this community. And then we have Peterson bucking the trend, and they put up these signs. So all that to say, it didn't cover that, in my opinion, but I think it's a good deal. Now, what I get you all to just be reminded of is that we allow Peterson to do this, whether it's a variance or a change, then Shriner will probably be in, and probably they should be. Walmart might be in, HEB. And so today, I was just kind of trying to think in my office, what would be a solution that staff could propose. And so maybe you say, this is something we want staff to go off and create some regulations for. And I was just looking at their signs, which are, arguably very neat. And so maybe you would allow them to do signs like this, if they're all consistent and the material's the same and it's, some limitation in size. And I think we could do that. All that to say is I think that's a neat kind of project that Peterson has done. And, I hate that they're bogged down in bureaucracy, but sometimes that happens.
Well, that was a reason for my question is, are we doing this sign variance basically to allow them to do the banners on the poles and not tying it into the community service? Because you're correct, Shriner University is gonna come in and other large parking lot, are gonna come in and
So if I could just elaborate for 1 second, because there are instances of these very banners up the street, they're commonly called street pole banners. Unfortunately, they're not defined within our sign ordinance in Kerrville, but they are frequently in other communities. Shriner University has street pole banners up. And I believe KISD also has street
The
pole
city
banners up.
does, I think.
And those, we do on the lamp posts actually all around City Hall, and it's actually under section 18 of the exempt part of the exemption section of the sign ordinance that reads, any permanent sign erected on school district property or any other school campus or public athletic facility for the sole purpose of displaying the school's logo, insignia, trademark, catchphrase, motto, or other similar content associated with any of the school or facility sports or extracurricular activities. The content may not include any type of commercial message to include the purpose of sponsorship. So that's where those signs have been exempted in the past. Unfortunately, the hospital doesn't fit within that
Right.
very strict school district. So that's really why myself and the former chief building official, Mr. Danny Batts, recommended to the applicant to come forward with a variance to see if this group felt it was also applicable within the parameters of being, a pseudo nonprofit, semi-public type entity.
But if you allow the school to do it, you could allow the hospital to do it, which would also keep Walmarts from doing it and other places like that, more commercial. I mean, I think the hospital
Nonprofit.
is like a different
Campus, yeah.
animal and the schools are different than Walmart, HEB. I mean, they have a different mission. They have a clear mission,
Yes, sir.
as the school does. So I think we could put that language to say, you could almost just say school districts and hospitals, or hospitals, excuse me, there's only one.
That's certainly the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Mike and EA, I have a question on this. On the application we're looking at, on the proposal, it talks about review criteria. To review criteria for approval to include the following, which reads to me that if this request falls under one of these, it can be an exception to the ordinance.
Well, you would go through each one of those criteria
Well,
and you
I'm
make a
just
finding.
looking-
Yes.
I'm trying to look at just the ones that might apply.
Well, you got to go through all of them.
You have to meet every one of those.
You have to go through that, right. And then you would, if you think that's applicable, they're all applicable, then you find that a variance exists, which again, it's a hard threshold, and it, arguably should be. But if you all want to go through that, you could do that.
Well, I looked at all these. I didn't read it, that it had to be complicit to all 9 of these things.
It's your typical variance provisions that ZBA has to go through as well. When ZBA looks at a use for perhaps the 604 Tivy property, they'll have to go through each one of those prongs and make that finding for each, and then if it does, then they'll make a finding that the variance exists, or a variance should exist.
So do we have an option as a commission to grant a variance?
You do. You do
Okay.
under the sign code. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But the granting a variance opens the door for others to come in.
Well, not
Well,
necessarily.
but we have to look at each one individually.
It'll apply just to Peterson.
Yeah.
But
Today.
certainly, right. I'll say a couple things in response to Mr. Hoppy. One, don't forget, and sometimes we do forget, but some, signs, quote unquote, have to be visible from the public right of way. And so, to the extent that Shriner has these and you can't see them from a public right of way, they're not signs. Part of their signage probably are not signs either, because you can't see them from Hill Country Drive or some of the public right of way. So that's to keep in mind. And yes, I understand what you're saying about applicability to nonprofits and messages such as these. But to the extent that Walmart comes in, they're going to argue
That there's going to be.
there,
for
yeah.
the
That
public too,
why
sure.
is there any difference?
Sure.
If ours are, eat well. Well, they want you to eat well, and they want you to come in and find something in
our
their
stuff
store,
well.
right? So I just kind of remind you of that as well.
Okay.
Anytime we approve an ordinance, it opens that same door.
Ordinances are wonderful. Yeah, it does. But
Exactly.
it also kind of levels the playing field, and everyone gets an opportunity to do that. And I'm obviously I'm cognizant of Peterson putting signs up in 2016 and then being before you in 2017. So I understand, you know, their interests. I
Well,
think it's
just their location is fairly unique. It's not really on a thoroughfare. You have to be going there. There are public right-of-ways that pass by it.
Sure. And I think the signs certainly in the back of their property, you know, if you have to sit there and crane your neck to see if it's a sign,
Well, you
it's not.
certainly have to basically be close to that pole to read those signs.
So we could do both, essentially. We could grant a variance and then also instruct staff to look into a amendment for poles, even using Peterson as an example for size, for number of poles used, you know. You know, if Walmart wanted to put some up and they were tastefully done and it wasn't on every pole, and I think that some of that might be okay to be allowed, but I think that it should be addressed. But I also feel that, you know, a variance might solve the immediate need, and then an amendment could address it for future projects.
So we can grant the variance without citing the reason why we're granting it? That's I mean, I'm for granting the variance, but.
No,
You need to go through that list and just, that's what gives you kind of the due process. I mean, everyone needs due process. They need due process. Their neighbors require due process. The community requires that you go through that. That'll make my heart, you know,
Easier.
feel better.
Yeah, we just have to.
Yes, but the other thing to remember too is, yes, and I agree with the commissioner's saying, you know, staff does that. Staff will take this and then try to figure out, does council support a change, and then we could, that'll come back. I forget if signed amendments come to you all, but that'll be something that, you know, I would at least recommend that you all have a chance to look at our proposed regulations.
And usually if there are a lot of variances that have been granted either by the zoning board or through any other kind of process, that's a good indication that you need a sign, that you need an amendment to.
Well, one of the things that's unique to the hospital, they are a nonprofit business, where Walmart is definitely not a nonprofit. So I think those things could be.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just keep in mind, if you don't remember anything I say today, remember this. If you have to read the sign, the message, then you may have an issue. And there's been a Supreme Court case directly on that. And so there's going to be some changes to the sign code in general because, and we can bring those back to you later, but basically that's it. And now that's a good reminder from, you know, the highest court in the land, that if you have to read a sign to figure out if you have to regulate it, then you've got some real issues. And it's not that you can't overcome that, but it's called strict scrutiny, and it's a very, very high standard. So, you know, and I get it, you know, nonprofits are not necessarily the same as for-profits, and Walmarts are different than Peterson and Shriner, but sometimes they're not.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
You have some homework to do, and then, so go through that process and do what you need to do, but just know that there'll be some sign code changes coming to you.
Mr. Murray, any other comments you'd like to make during the public hearing portion?
I appreciate the clarification on some of that, because when I did look at the review criteria, I did not see that it needed to be complete, and I even went back to the section 6-44, which is, I think, where this was extracted from. And I mean, there are a few of these that I think would be appropriate, but certainly not the, I'd be hard pressed to say, oh yes, the exhaustive list is absolutely
I would agree.
met. Again, I appreciate your consideration. Again, I think that the easy out would be add hospitals to the schools section. But the other option, which is the route we chose, was to request a variance, and so that's what I'm
Okay.
here to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else to speak during the public section right now, please approach the podium. Seeing none, I close the public hearing at 6:05. Comments? I did like the something we could do currently, and then go back and amend the language at some point to make it fit, so we wouldn't keep that door open very long.
Right. You know, the thing about granting a variance is it just opens the door for more variances. It doesn't open them to be granted.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly.
They're each individually subject to our review.
Right. And so, you know, so that just means that we could end up with more on our plate, but it does mean that we get to address it.
Yeah.
With the intention of eventually having amendments to the code that could satisfy those.
That would clarify that.
I guess my only concern right now is wording the variance in a manner that justifies it, I guess, so to speak. And
Well, I mean, can we look at what she presented
Language
to us
again.
here in the community service sign?
yeah,
That doesn't-
yes, I mean, we can. You know, we could, as a commission, decide that these banners fit that exemption, and to also instruct staff to,
come up with an amendment, I agree with
Yeah,
that. At least that would give them the ability to
Go ahead and put them back
come
up.
back up under the.
Yeah.
under
And what
the-
this does call for, it says community service, it's a temporary sign.
Yeah, but, I mean,
well, they are temporary, they're already down.
yeah.
I mean, they were
No, but-
temporary because they were only up for
Then I'd
10
hate
months.
to grant the variance under that to let them go back up. It's a temporary sign until the ordinance can be amended appropriately.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they can't just be up forever.
Right.
And their intent is to keep those
Well,
up for a lengthy time.
temporary is a relative term. I mean, temporary can be for 5 years.
We're all temporary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't have concern with that, but I agree with you about, I mean, grant the variance under the community service exemption
Mhm.
and instruct the city to come up with a suggestion or to amend the sign ordinance to solve this issue.
Make that motion, Mike.
Okay.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
we need a motion if you're ready. Any other comments, Rustin?
I mean, I would make a motion that we approve the variance under the community service exemption clause and instruct the city to begin the process of looking at amending the sign ordinance to deal with this issue.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. The only question I've got, can we make that signs instead of singular?
Oh, was it? Yeah, you probably.
Because it says
It
sign.
says sign.
Right, signs. I mean, is it 14?
Can we be specific and,
Sure, you
In that
can say
area.
14. I mean, you know, one of those prongs is do the variance as limited as possible.
Right.
You might want to do, I don't know if you're going to add any more. I mean, is your, no?
I don't believe, however,
Well, hopefully by the time they want to, that we'll have a new
We'll see
sign.
you
it'll
again.
be changed?
we will be breaking ground in the next month on another building on vacant property, and that will have parking associated with it. So
I guess you'll have to come back,
we
Pat.
will have to come back tonight.
But you could wait, hopefully, till some kind of amendment
Next month.
possibly could arise. Okay. Okay, so I have a motion
Well,
and a second.
We'll change the motion to grant the variance for the 14 signs under the community service exemption.
Okay, thanks for that
And instruct the
clarification.
city to look at the process of amending the sign ordinance to deal with this.
Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Staff reports.
I have nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. If not, I'll accept the motion to adjourn if there's no other business.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Passes